Call this meeting to order. Thank you, everyone, for coming. It's so nice to see so many faces. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes from the October 11th meeting?
I move to approve the minutes from the October meeting.
Second? All in favor? Aye. Okay. All right, moving on to the 200 series.
I can jump in, Jane, here if you want me to.
Okay, great.
So the 200 series we have already had at P&G one time, and I'm not sure we needed to have it here again this evening because you're going to get the second reading on the regular agenda tonight, as well as the motion for approval or the selected approval of this 200 series. So I couldn't remember if there was a reason or not, or if that was just a mistake on our part, but the 200 series you have already seen here at P&G. The 300 and 400s would be new, but you're slated to approve the 200s tonight. So.
Okay, I'm glad that it was there because I've been doing some thinking about the whole quasi-judicial paragraph there on 200.3. And I sort of came up with some rewording, and I don't know if that's going to be okay with everyone, but just thinking about the absolutes of not ever becoming involved. And so that last sentence, to preserve the board's neutrality to hear and decide, I kind of came up with some different wording, and if it's not okay with the board, that's fine, but I thought this worded it a little bit better. Board members, for the last sentence, board members should be mindful of the need to preserve their neutral arbiter status in student disciplinary situations or employee matters that may come before the board in their quasi-judicial role. Rather than the way that it's worded, that board members do not investigate or become involved in student disciplinary matters or employment matters that may be coming before it. I just felt that it was worded better and it was less absolute because I think there's always exceptions.
Jane, could you direct me to it? I'm at 203, but I need you to tell me where I am.
It is
It's in yellow, that last
Page
page 8,
Thank you, I don't know,
Page
mine's
8.
not in yellow.
and it's the paragraph that's in yellow. So what I'm proposing is just changing that last sentence
Okay, sorry, can I read it one more time?
to read, okay.
Yours.
Board, instead of to preserve the board's neutrality,
Yep.
that sentence, board members should be mindful of the need to preserve their neutral arbiter status in student disciplinary situations or employment matters that may come before the board in their quasi-judicial role.
Because it's hard
Sure.
to
Yeah,
agree to
sure.
something without
Absolutely.
seeing it in front of
I
you.
agree. Board members should be mindful of the need to preserve their neutral arbiter status in student disciplinary situations or employment matters that may come before the board in their quasi-judicial role.
I'm sure just as a new person, I don't know any better, but I guess I don't know when it is that the board would, I just feel like that's not a role for the board, but like I said, I'm super new, so I probably don't understand when it might be. But I don't know when we'd ever be involved in student disciplinary matters
Yeah.
or employment matters.
I just want to be careful about completely closing the door on people because I think it's never a good situation when people feel they don't have someone to turn to. And so while I have full confidence that that due process is being followed, I know that there are cases in the past where it was not. And so it's not very common that disciplinary matters or employment matters come before the board.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot that happens before that. And if due process is not being followed, then I think the board should be aware.
But is the board the step then, or is it to go back to the step where the due process didn't happen?
I guess I just don't want it in our policies that, so that a parent will read that and think, oh, I can't go to the board. Or that a board member will read this and say, oh, I can't respond to this parent.
How do our administrators feel about that? I would be comfortable closing that door, on purpose.
Yeah.
But I'm not an administrator, so I'd like to know what the administrators think about that.
You'd be comfortable saying the board wasn't going to do that? Yeah, I guess I probably would too, and if I think about being an administrator, probably
I think-
same, because I don't know that as a board member, I can investigate, or I don't know. I
And
just-
personally, as a board member, I don't want parents to think that I'm going to
Yeah.
investigate. And parents still come, I just have a different feeling that even though we have policies that say a lot of things, people still reach out and ask for things. I don't think it will necessarily close that opportunity, but I fear setting that in policy and future boards and future board members will see that and do things, try and do their own investigations that could cause more harm to the district.
I'm not saying that the board can and should or can investigate. I'm not saying that, I'm not adding that, I'm just, this paragraph wasn't there before, right? So,
Right, I know that, I'm just saying, I like the fact that it's saying, spelling out that you do not do this.
okay.
Because having worked with other people, not having that clarification, and if it's not spelled out that you don't do this, then they take it to mean that I do this.
Okay. I see.
But, sorry, Martha had a question on the table, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing from your concern, Jane, is just about people feeling comfortable to reach out to the board with concerns, right? And I think we certainly want people to feel comfortable doing that. I think the key part of this one about taking out that language is investigate, right? I don't think you guys want to be in the investigatory role, and that's not what I'm hearing you say is necessarily your concern. It's just about how do we make sure people know they have an avenue to the board to at least express a concern or a frustration, right, if something isn't handled appropriately. So I almost wonder if that needs to just be clarified either here or in a different policy, or maybe we just need to do a kind of a look through of some other policy to see if that is stipulated somewhere else. But I think what this one is just saying, you don't want to be intertwined in a student disciplinary issue or an employment matter because you may have to hear, opposing sides of that issue at the back end in your quasi-judicial role. So this one's protecting you from not becoming involved in the investigation. We just need to also protect your right about, or the community's right about being able to come to you with some concerns, right? Now, your ability to deal
That's
with
my
those
concern.
concerns,
That's
right,
my-
could be a
I
little
don't-
bit
yeah.
limited, but.
I don't want to investigate that. I was just trying
Right.
to word it in such a way that it wasn't so absolute, so that parents wouldn't read that and think, oh, there's no one I can go to.
Right. So I guess my suggestion would be we leave the language there, but we look for another point about where does it give, those stakeholders the right to go to the board, or where can we clarify that in policy, or should we add something,
Yeah.
in there that says, stakeholders of the district can contact board members about concerns they have, and then board members will address it through the appropriate
Okay.
channels or something like that. So we can take another look at that. I mean, I wouldn't suggest an edit to this policy tonight, but that could be something we could put on a future P&G meeting just to say, how do we get that, to make sure that's stipulated somewhere in policy.
I mean, it could be as easy as, while citizens always have the right to address the board, in the case an incident would reach the board level, because that's really what this is about.
Mhm.
Like, we may have to hear an expulsion hearing. And if we've been involved in that, then you can't be objected in that, or termination.
Or a termination, yeah.
There's also another, there's a reason to keep some sort of distance, for lack of a better word. When I depose board members and administrators, as a board member, you want to be able to say, that's not what I do. I don't know that. That's not my expertise. You have to ask an administrator. So I like to keep that veil around the people that are experts in what they're doing. And for legal reasons, I think it's best if the board is careful not to. I mean, I want us to say, sorry, I can't do that. I can't. To a parent. And I've had to say it several times, right? Like, that's not, I can't do that. I can send it to the people that do that. I guess that's another layer of separation I think is important.
Okay. that's fine. I just want to make sure that parents know that they, you know.
We'll work
Yeah.
on some language to
Yeah,
see where it
yeah.
fits in. I think it's, yeah, you just wanted to make sure
I-
people feel comfortable to reach out
Right.
about concerns around the district.
If there are some
Yep.
irregularities that.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
And then I like
Yeah.
JP's suggestion about, you know, they can reach out, but here's gonna be our line, right? I mean, here's the line we don't wanna cross, to Maka's point, so we'll work on that.
Okay, great. Let's move on to 300 series then. I don't, were there any changes to the 300 series? I didn't see any. Does anybody have any changes to make to the 300 series? Okay. All right, we move on to 400s then. I don't think there was any changes to that either.
No, at least
That's a bruiser.
just trying to.
Can we go through this one line by line?
All right, no one has any changes to the 400 series then? Okay. And then, so the policy primers. Did you want to
Yeah,
take that?
can I jump
Okay.
into that one? Yep. So you have a few different things here in front of you. One is the new competitive bid and quote threshold, and then a document out purchase bidding 7051. We think there's not much controversy in those. The one we probably wanted to spend the bulk of the evening having you guys discuss a little bit tonight is around House File 802, transparency, and then curriculum instruction materials. Some of the suggested language from the School Board Association is not necessarily required by law at this point. I think, assuming best intent, the School Board Association is probably trying to get ahead of some bad policy, potentially in Des Moines, around these two issues and protect districts by saying it's already in our policy to do. I think as we've talked to our library coordinator and our librarians and also our curriculum instruction team through Carmen, we're not sure we should move to that policy change at this point, and wanted you guys to have that information and some of their opinions. So what you see in the red and the yellow, the red strike through and the yellow additions are what the School Board Association is recommending. But then also what you're going to have there at the very end of this document, I thought it was at the end of the document, or no, Amy's going to provide to you here in hard copy, we didn't post that, is basically some of our dialogue around this and our notes and our thinking about why this could be good or why this could be bad. We don't necessarily have a problem right now currently in the district with instructional materials getting challenged. We've had a long standing process for that, and one that actually the state tried to pattern somewhat. I know Mary Masher had asked for it last year and provided it to the State House around this, our district's already doing this is what you can do. But it doesn't mean we won't have a curricular challenge in the future. We know that we have people that show up at the board meeting every once in a while and talk about our equity newsletter or talk about some of the instructional resources we provide. So at some point we could, and so I think it's just a matter of what do you want to cement into policy, knowing you don't have to at this point, and then also seeing the feedback here from, you see Lisa, Carmen, and Amy's feedback on these different policies. So it might take you a minute to work through this and read it. We do have a chunk of time here left, and then to have a conversation about what we want to do from a policy standpoint. So am I making sense with kind of outlining what the concern is there and why we didn't want to just propose a policy for adoption right away? And Carmen, anything you'd add?
Nope, it's pretty much in there.
So Matt, can you just briefly say what parts of this document are this series policy can support students and teachers who are puzzled by House File 802 about its intent? Does it clarify anything?
Could we take a few minutes to review what they just gave us so then we can all be on the same page? Otherwise, I don't think I can follow everything. I think if we just have a moment to read it.
Yeah, the one I would pay special attention to as you're looking through it, you can see in Lisa's category would be 605.3. You see she says strongly advise we do not. You see 605.3E4.
Yeah.
that says, I strongly advise that we do not. So those are the ones that have the most considerable
Okay.
objections, so maybe pay special attention to those.
Okay.
And then, I agree, I think look through it for a little bit and then we'll talk about it some more. We're doing homework right now. Are we still reading, or are you all right if I jump in with a couple
Go ahead,
comments?
yeah.
Okay, so I think so if you think about 802, the portion of 802 that is implied here that's being affected by this is the transparency provision. So this is the parents' rights movement, right? And parents' rights to object to instructional materials for their kids, parents' rights to also prohibit their students from accessing library materials. Why is that important, right? Well, if you have an LGBTQ youth that wants to access some books, that either to see themselves in the story or to potentially learn more about themselves or what they're going through, this would definitely limit the student's ability to do that if the parent said we don't want our student doing that. So it's a little bit of students' rights too, mixed in with the parents' rights. It's about what is the district's role in that. You know, the legislative talk has been that parents should have more rights in that, and they should be able to refuse their students from being able to access those materials, whether they're instructional or in the library. So I think that's the philosophical question, is do you want to open up a policy that does allow parents to step in and do that? Again, I think what the School Board Association is doing here is anticipating that'll be legislation we see that may be, this question may be taken off the table for us in 3 months. But right now, I think the question in front of you is, do you want to look at a policy that does what the School Board Association says, or do we want to keep it as we've had, where really parents don't have the ability to step in and do that at the current time, or restrict their students from accessing certain books or objecting to those instructional materials in the same way? So that's why you see Lisa strongly advocating against those, but that's where it comes from. And so the other parts of 802 aren't as much at play here. It's really the transparency provision. And again, you see some comments throughout the dialogue there. We don't have anything to hide. We'll share our course catalog or instructional resources. We'll share what's in the library. It's about allowing parents to restrict what their students access during that time. So that's the bigger picture piece. There's some other editorial comments in here that are probably smaller details that if we have some overall direction from how you would like to approach this philosophically, then we could probably work through some of those other smaller points a little bit easier and provide some recommendations to you. So again, instructional team, anything I'm kind of missing from an overview perspective there, but I think that's kind of the big question.
Yeah, the other thing I would say is I do have a copy of the policy primers on hand, so sometimes they'll say, you know, this is not something you have to do, obviously Matt's saying that to you too, and so if we want to reference any of these specifically where I can share what IESD states in their example. But Kim did a nice job of essentially, like Matt said, putting it in yellow and red where the changes that they're suggesting are at.
I think the only addition we had here was that some parts that Lisa and I both agreed on here was the reviewing of the materials for instruction materials, just like in a way to lessen the, I guess, the questioning for transparency or the questioning for the resources we're using was to open up a little bit of the space of who gets to be part of that review. And so just allow some, right now we have community members and we have community members and parents and students who are part of the curriculum review process to invite them to also be part of the selection process. So that way we can just say that it's not just teachers and curriculum coordinators who are doing it, but we are opening it up to other people who are part of that procedure too. So it just lessens that, the argumentation that comes with it. And I think the other piece we talked about, I think you kind of mentioned this, Charlie, was just the House Files 802. And we're talking about just more of when we do that selection process, some more training with regards to what that entails. So that, because we do know there's some little bit of some fuzziness around that of what it is and what is not. And so Laura Gray has done amazing work just with the curriculum review processes and training. Each of those procedures starts with a 1 day of 2-hour training that she does about what the House Files is. And so providing more of that training to the members who are part of the selection process and have an idea of exactly what we're walking into, what to be aware of.
Are you talking about training for teachers too?
I'll say more or less to that when it comes to the selection of materials, which is what's entailed in the House Files.
When we talk about materials, could the material be, for example, say a parent has a child who was the victim of a sexual assault, and there is a book that is frequently checked out that might have something to do with that, and the parent has knowledge based on the therapy their child has received, that book might be triggering. Or there are several books like that for kids that have suffered different things, okay? So wouldn't that be an appropriate time? Sometimes I want to consider what kind of materials might really not be a good idea, and a parent would say, like there's one book that was part of the curriculum that was about some kind of kidnapping, and all 3 of my kids were very different, were very disturbed by that book. I didn't weigh in, but I could see a parent being like, that book is scary and dark and I hate it. I don't want my kid to check it out. I'm just wondering, am I a weirdo kind of? Being overprotective kind of? Am I missing it?
Well, I think the point you're making that's relevant is, look at it issue agnostically, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
I gave you the example of LGBTQ.
Right.
There could be something on race, like what if we, a parent said, well, I don't want them reading about any black people, right? I don't want my student to be able to check out a book. What if I don't want them to read about anything that has to do with sexual assault? The problem is, right, it opens that up wide open that parents can restrict any topic in that sense, right? So that's the troubling part of this a little bit, but there's probably also valid reasons parents would have to say, I don't want my student accessing that book. We wouldn't all agree on what those valid reasons are, but
No.
there could be one that would sound a lot more legitimate to us than others, just like the example you detailed there,
Yeah,
right?
and I'm an
About it.
English teacher and an English major. I mean, I
So-
love books, but I do see that there are times where a parent might say, no, I mean, that book is not okay for my kid to check out based on what I know about my kid.
But is that a thing that the parent should put into play or the school? I mean, sometimes I just was thinking like cell phones, parents used to say to us, well, you take the cell phone away. I'm like, well, you take the cell phone away. I mean, it's, so is that something parents should talk about with that we leave that responsibility to parents to take care of it with their
That's a great
kids?
point.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, I think since my view is, these aren't laws yet, we're not required to do it yet, I'm fine with not crossing that bridge yet.
Mhm.
But that's additional work that P&G will have to be at the ready if and when these go into
Mhm.
passage. So I think the conversation is good to have now on what language works, but not something that we should enact to approve at the board table until it's a must.
Well, it shows you the problem that what some people want to do is micromanage our libraries. If we are going to run into a very difficult time micromanaging our own staff, I can tell you when people pass these laws, that's what they're going to run into, is this isn't logistically possible. Because you're going to ban every book in your library. Stephen King's probably in our libraries. Would anybody, I mean, you could say there's really scary, very objectionable stuff in there. Are we going to ban our kids from reading that? Because it could trigger any number of things, and that's where I say, where's the parents? That if you feel strongly, right? And for us, I think, because we know our community, we can use LGBTQ as an example because that's where we can clearly see, there might be, and as educators, you've run into situations where you see children who aren't safe at home, right? For any number of reasons. It's not something you can report, and even if you reported, nothing the state would do anything about just because of how complicated these are. But there are situations where kids aren't safe. And we're saying, we're going to create a safe intellectual space for you. That we're going to provide a broad array of materials. We're going to trust our staff to choose those materials. We're going to hire the best people we can hire who have been trained, who are certified by the state, to make these choices that this particular book is going to be okay for some kids to read. Some books are okay to have in our library, but we don't put them in our curriculum. Some books are okay to have in our curriculum, but maybe we'll have options and where it's not a required book. And that's where I think as a board, we have to let our staff make those kinds of decisions because you all have the training and the expertise and the knowledge base to do that. This is where we're going to run into trouble, and they'll run into it at the state level, and they're going to run it. We're all going to run into hiccups we don't foresee because people are trying to micromanage this who don't know, and they're trying to give a lot of power to a small. Because my question is, has this come up? Have we had a parent come to us and say they don't want their kid to have access to a book in the library? A single parent in the entire Iowa City Community School District. And if not, why are we talking about it? I know why, because we have a feeling of what's coming. But I think I don't want to enable folks who are trying to micromanage classrooms, not just because I may disagree with where they're coming from, but because I know it just won't work.
I attended the committee hearing on this, and I think that's not all this is. Like the application, for example, is for one book for one student. It's not about a book ban. There are things that are about a book ban, but I think we need to be careful about that. That's not what this is about. And so the obvious pushback you will get, whether we've had it in the last 2 years, we know times are changing. And if you went to that committee hearing, you would have seen the line out the door for people making these arguments. It's going to be more popular to make these arguments. And it's a one book for my one, it says child affected. And the pushback is, no, I'm not going to micromanage you as a teacher. I'm going to micromanage my kid. And that's why your answer is the one that I find very compelling, where okay, you can talk to your child about not reading a book about X, Y, or Z. So I do think there's more of a gray area that we have to allow ourselves to think about because, again, the climate has changed and the law is coming and this isn't as unreasonable as, our knee-jerk responses to book banning.
I share Molly's concerns and that what we're going to do is have our librarians spending all of their time managing parent lists. And here's an example that I would give. I don't want my kids drinking chocolate milk at school. I don't. I want them to choose white milk. But it's my responsibility to talk with them about when you go through the lunch line, you need to choose white milk. I can't call the school and say, you're not allowed to serve Finley and May chocolate milk, and I want you to put something special on their lunch account that says they're not allowed. That's not how we operate anywhere else, because it's not logistically possible. And to Ruthina's point, if we have to, we have to. But if we don't have to, I just feel like the parents have a responsibility in being partners with us and speaking to their children about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable for their family unit. And then those kids, they have to have a relationship where they trust their parents, and if they don't, it's not our fault or our responsibility to get involved in parenting that child in that way. The parent needs to parent and be involved. Now, my question is, can parents access a list of what their kids have checked out? Do they have access to know what materials their kids are accessing?
Probably. I mean, the library knows.
We would have to send it to them, we could
Yeah,
run it.
we could run their
They
reporting
wouldn't
on
have
that.
like open, like, they can't get it in Infinite Campus.
Because-
They'd have to be run, yeah.
Because to me, that's the middle ground. Like, as long as parents know what their kids are checking out, then they have the opportunity to have the conversation and to stop, if they're checking out what they believe is objectionable, talking to their kid about, this is why I don't want you reading this book, and then they have the information they need to monitor if that's continuing to happen. And that's how we give parents the power to control this happening. But it's not by making our librarians check a list every time. I mean,
That's my worry, is the logistics.
yeah.
It's the same thing with recording, posting your curriculum. This is gonna drive more people out of the front. It just isn't logistically possible in the time people have to run these lists. And that's where I think it's gonna run up against a hiccup is, you're asking people to do something that can't be done in the time that we've given them to do it.
But in the same meeting, we said 0 people complained in 2 years, like just 10 minutes ago. So how are we going from that to saying, we can't do it because we'll be overwhelmed with?
I just mean.
Well,
state
because
law.
I think if it's a policy, then every time a kid checks out a book, the librarian is going to have to check a list. And maybe hardly anybody has books that they're not allowed to check out, but I think the librarian is going to have to check the list every single time to confirm that, because who knows if 2 days ago the parent decided to add an objectionable book.
So, are all the books that we're talking about available in all city libraries?
At all, like, public libraries?
No,
Well, students have access,
No,
when you think about
that's
our
right.
access to our AIM card, so our students have the AIM card access, so in
Which is
theory.
access to all public libraries.
Yeah.
To all public
So the
libraries.
kids have access to the books from different.
Right, they could go downtown and get the book if they couldn't get it in our library.
To Lisa's
I'm
point,
not-
yeah,
I'm not terribly,
this is
if
part
I'm
of
a
the
parent,
process.
I'm not terribly interested in school libraries as much as I am public
Or
libraries.
bookstores or Amazon.
Yeah, right.
But to Lisa's point, this is all part of a very important part of our child's development in learning how to make choices for themselves, right? And to take that away from them, I think is a mistake. So,
I think most educators are going to invite more parents to get involved in what their kids are learning. Like, I would love you to check out what I've got going on. But don't, as a knee jerk, don't make every teacher the state publish or librarians go through these unwieldy.
I mean, I think what I'm hearing you guys say right now is that we aren't in favor of the optional language at this point about parents' objection to the, what's the right way to say it? Request to prohibit a student from checking out specific library materials. And then the optional language of parents or guardians of students enrolled in the district have the ability to request that their student not be able to check out certain library materials. That's in the objection to instructional materials, as well as 605.3E4, request to prohibit them from checking them out. So it's optional language at this point. It sounds like we're not in favor of doing that. I think I would just, awareness for everybody that, it could be
it could change.
upon us in the next legislative session. And I think, to be honest, where this is coming from is around a lot of our LGBTQ materials or some of those things. I mean, that's where this bubble's coming from. There are probably some other, we've talked about a couple other examples where I can see parents being concerned, but I think that's where this narrative started, and, the governor ran on some pretty explicit comments around that, so I don't anticipate it going away. This was an issue last time. So I think we'll just need to keep aware of that, but at this point, I'm not hearing support for the optional language in there, so we can adjust those policies accordingly. I think most of the other suggestions in here, I don't know if we want to go back to those now tonight and see if there's anything else that was problematic for people, but those were, I know, the two most problematic sections as we saw it. And one of them you kind of talked about public access to the Destiny catalog, just to see what's in our library catalog. Chase and I were sidebarring over here. I wonder if there's even a way we could put in Infant Campus what materials your student currently has checked out. I don't know. I think I'd also want to talk to our library folks from that, because they could also say that, you know, now we've basically
I'd
just
rather not
exposed
do it
what they
if
have,
we
right?
don't
Yeah.
have
So,
to.
yeah.
It's a lot to think about.
Mhm.
And it's political too. I mean, that's why we
Right.
have to be thinking about all of the arguments and whether we signal certain things that will actually make us have more pressure to do what we don't want to do. And so I'm thinking about that.
Right.
If we say no to something, will it be used against us? So.
Well, and I do think that, again, I think that's why the school board position is suggesting what they're suggesting, is because how do we help maybe avoid
Yep.
something getting coded into law is, okay, well, let's put it into policy already. School districts already have a policy that parents can do that. The problem is,
They're
now
gonna
you've
do
done
it.
it without having to do it, right? So,
And they're still gonna do
They're
it.
gonna.
yeah, I think
We
they're
don't
gonna
know
do
what
it
they're
too.
gonna do, so we might have to do this and come back again.
Yeah.
and Do it again.
And the suggested changes are in yellow. Correct.
Yellow are additions, red is what they suggest be struck.
I'm sorry, say that again, Karen.
Yellow are additions, what they say we should add, and the red is what they recommend we strike.
Gotcha.
So some of this, what we would do then is pull this out the next time for you, and probably just put these primers in front of you again and say, based on your last conversation, here's what we're recommending now.
I also think if you meet with the teacher librarians about these things, and I'm glad that we got the feedback we got, this was a good way of giving us feedback. I think that you feel more and more confident about their expertise. You know, I hate undermining them in any way. Our teacher librarians are pretty incredible. And they teach everything and everyone.
Yeah.
So Alaka, is that suggesting that teacher librarians now address some of these issues with students that we talked about? On a regular basis, or-
I'm suggesting that as board members and as administrators, as we move forward with these, it's just always important to realize that the teacher librarians have the expertise, and it is contemplated in their comments. But if you haven't spent time recently learning about what they're doing, for example, some principals don't even know like the interaction their teacher librarians have on a daily basis with the kids. I just think it's important. It informs you about when you're thinking about whether we need to be real careful if our teacher librarians are poisoning our kids with LGBTQ, turning them all into lesbians. I don't think they're doing that, probably.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're some of our best partners in our equity work based on the way they're collating collections for us. I think JP's example about Stephen King is a good one and something the board would have to be careful about. There'd be a lot of books that honestly were put in front of you, you'd be uncomfortable with some of the topics, you know, and that's a library, right?
Yep.
I mean, so I think you just have to be careful, the bigger picture about stepping into this arena about what you're going to make value judgments on, because you could have a whole host of issues that looked at that excerpt from that book is going to make you uncomfortable, whether it's a sexual issue, a violence issue,
Yeah.
you know, a mental health issue. All of those things I think could really make you uncomfortable and feel like, well, maybe we should step in and exclude this book from our collection. But they spend a tremendous amount of time looking at that, looking at some of the best award-winning books, you know, and Access for Kids. I mean, I feel strongly about that. I mean, we do have great teacher librarians that do spend time in our classrooms teaching our kids. So they're an asset for us for sure. And I don't think, as much as we can, we don't really want to try to step in their way and get in the way, because that's back to the micromanaging. If we try to do that, we're going to be in trouble.
But we do have, there is a set of guidelines that teacher librarians use in making these decisions. Is
Yep,
that not-
yep. And there's a process to challenge something. I mean, if somebody is really unhappy and we do get a, you know, frustrated person that says, why is this book included? There is a process to challenge that that's worked through, you know, with our team, and then eventually, you know, could be heard by you guys if it got to that point.
And I would imagine if a parent had a real issue and they went to their teacher librarian, one, that is the person to talk through it And to come up with an individual solution based on that kid and that family, and be like, hey, okay, we see the point, without coming up with this broad policy, like, let's trust our professionals and solve the problem if there's a problem, rather than making a solution that's looking for a problem, solve it at its most basic level with people on the ground. And it comes back to that, just trusting our people, just trust the folks that we've hired and their expertise, and let them do their best work. And I think our parents, my guess would be, largely, that's how most people in this community feel. And we'll deal with what comes at us from the state when it is.
So we'll bring these back again, then with some suggestions. Thanks.
Do we have any questions about the increase in the policy for the increasing of the competitive bid threshold?
That's just changing the law.
Yep.
Okay, then, when is the next meeting?
Oh, we're in that weird time of year,
Oh.
because it's December.
So we don't have.
Not till
Yeah, you won't have one until January, no.
Yeah, because I think it's the holiday, we skip December.
So what, the 24th of January, Jane?
Okay, great.
We're leaving these with you all.
Yeah, we'll take those back.
All right, motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.